All right, we'll give everybody a few seconds to trickle in here and then we can get started. All right, welcome to the Soybean Success Strategies webinar brought to you by Bayer and DEKALB Seeds. My name is Quinton Moorhead. I'm the National Account Manager of Top Crop Manager and the moderator of today's session. Keeping your soybean field clean during the critical weed-free period could have big impacts on your soybean yield potential. Today, we'll hear from Kurtis Pilkington, Technical Solution Agronomist with Bayer Crop Science, and Tyler Sabelli, Agronomic Solution Advisor, Bayer Crop Science, to learn how the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system helps with short-term residual control of tough-to-manage weeds like Canada fleabane, so you can maximize your yield potential. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants and attendees approximately 24 hours after our live broadcast. Session is scheduled to run for about 60 minutes. These two will speak for 45 of those minutes, and following their presentation, we'll open the floor to questions. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the questions tab found on your computer screen. The Q&A tab, please, not the chat, if you can. This webinar has been approved for 1 CCA CEU in crop management, and there will be further instructions for submission following the presentation. That's going to be it for me, so I'll let Tyler and Kurtis take it away.
Thanks, Quinton. And good morning, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time here today to join us. I know Tyler and I are pretty excited to share about a critical weed-free period today and how the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system offers some great agronomic solutions to protect your crop through that period. So what I want to do to start things off today is give a bit of a run through on what the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system is. So we can break this system out into 2 trait platforms. Well, first, we have our Roundup Ready to Xtend soybeans. Now, these are soybeans that are going to convey a herbicide tolerance to 2 different herbicides. We have glyphosate, our Group 9. We know that as a Roundup Weather Max. And then we also have dicamba, which is our Group 4, and a solo product as Xtend and Max 2. Now, we also have the combination product, the premix of Roundup Xtend 2, which contains both glyphosate and dicamba. Now, the XtendFlex system that builds on top of the Roundup Ready to Xtend system with the addition of glufosinate tolerance. So that's our Group 10. You might know it as Liberty. This is going to bring another great mode of action to the table, particularly if we're trying to target some of those tough to control weeds in season and those glyphosate resistant weeds.
So just diving into XtendFlex, as Kurtis mentioned, XtendFlex system offers triple over-the-top herbicide tolerance to Group 9 glyphosate, the Group 4 dicamba, as well as glufosinate, which is the Group 10, as Kurtis went through. The XtendFlex system offers choice and another option, as well as flexibility to manage tough to control and resistant weeds in your operation. With that, XtendFlex could have some key advantages and benefits versus Pioneer's Enlist E3 system. So as I mentioned, the early season residual activity from dicamba, that realistic time frame is around 3 to 5 weeks versus 2,4-D with virtually no residual or minimal residual. With the residual activity, we're seeing better overall weed control. The dicamba is a better herbicide, a stronger herbicide when we compare it to 2,4-D on that initial kill. Growers are seeing a superior control on challenging weeds such as Canada fleabane with dicamba, as well as we can now offer a safe and very effective in-crop post option such as the glufosinate, your Group 10. In addition to the key benefits that we're seeing with the weed platform, we're seeing better genetics with the overall with Roundup Xtend and the XtendFlex system. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation.
So to dive into how to most effectively use these herbicide products, I want to touch on our application windows here and then recommended application timings. So for Roundup Xtend 2, Xtend and Max 2, any straight Roundup products or glufosinate, you can apply VE all the way up until R1. So that's in the beginning of bloom. And then Roundup itself extends a little bit further. You can get into full bloom or R2 timing. Now we can split this large period up into 2 optimal application windows. So first off, to make the best use of XtendMax 2 or Roundup Xtend 2. So we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of that residual weed control and going in with an early application with dicamba. So that early application window is going to be pre-emergence up until V2. And that can, when you apply within that window, can depend on what system you're operating. So if you're in a no-till system, maybe you're using that Roundup Xtend 2 down pre-emergence for an early season burn-off. If it's a conventional system and you're using tillage to clean that field prior to planting, then an early application shortly after emergence. Essentially, what we're going for here is we want to make sure that short-term residual control is down and carrying us through that critical weed-free period. Now, also, the XtendFlex system offers great opportunities for in-crop cleanup if that's required with glyphosate or glufosinate. Depending on which product you use is going to be dependent on your weeds that you might be facing in field. If you're dealing with glyphosate tolerant weeds, that's where the XtendFlex system really shines with glufosinate, because you've got a great option to go after them.
So starting clean with the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system, starting clean is absolutely crucial. The critical weed-free period with growing any crop is very, very important. We wanted to give folks a bit of a reminder of when the soybean critical weed-free period is. It's actually from emergence to third trifoliate, or the VE to V3 stage. During this time, irreversible yield losses of weeds are present. Through this time, when there's weeds present competing with your soybean crop, we know there's a significant loss. The smaller the soybeans, the greater the loss. And through some of the work that Peter Sikkema has done, we can see yield loss can exceed up to 50% where significant competition is present. With the Roundup Xtend 2 and XtendMax products, we can see that effective short-term residual weed control. And as Kurtis went through our illustration on the right side of the screen there, we really wanted to highlight that recommended application timing is early pre-plant to early post, and to get the most bang out of your buck out of that dicamba, lay down your residual program, and you'll have the most effectiveness out of that product.
Yeah, and I think the main thing to emphasize here is the earlier the better. Like when we see that 50% yield loss, that's at a carpet of weeds in the VE emergent stage, and that yield loss will gradually decline over the critical weed-free period until past V3 it tapers down to essentially nothing. But really, any weed pressure in that early period, it's really important that we're ensuring that we're giving that crop the best chance and it's not competing with any weed pressure in field. And to sort of illustrate that here, this is a trial we did a few years ago looking at WeatherMax followed by WeatherMax, so Roundup products, versus Roundup WeatherMax with dicamba in a pre-plant followed by Roundup WeatherMax. And what we found here is compared to a 2-pass glyphosate treatment alone, there's a 2.4 bushel per acre advantage of having dicamba in the system. And really the reason for that is even though you're getting a burn-off cleanup with that early pre-plant WeatherMax, any of those weeds that are germinating and emerging right around the same time as that soybean crop, that's really the ultimate period for competition where we can see the biggest weed hit. So even if it's a short-term residual control like you see with a dicamba product that carries you through those couple of weeks to get you past V3, that's really the essential time to make sure that field stays as clean as possible. One thing I did want to mention here as well is if you're looking for a long-term full season residual control, or potentially looking for additional residual control on grasses. As we know that group 4s, like dicamba, they aren't the grass specialists out there. Sencor is another great option you can include in a tank mix for a pre-plant application. As you'll see in a few slides later on, we've played around quite a bit with this and found great success, particularly in repressing any of those grass weeds from emerging during this critical weed-free period as well.
So we talked about starting clean, and it's very important to stay clean throughout the season. The full season control is key for long-term control. And when we talk about long-term control, we're preventing weed seeds from returning to the soil bank, right? To create challenges for other years, for future years and future crops. Today we're dealing with herbicide-resistant weeds such as Canada fleabane, giant ragweed, and now water hemp is rearing its ugly head on a lot of fields. So we need to be conscious of cleaning up fields and not allowing them to go to seed later on. Another benefit, you're going to want to ensure clean grain and ease for harvestability come fall. So very important to start clean and stay clean throughout the season. XtendFlex gives us a great option now with the use of glufosinate later as a safer, effective post application.
Something else we want to touch on, bring some attention to, is just Xtend key application requirements. And to be honest, a lot of this applies for any product you're applying. We want to make sure whatever is going down on the field is going down and staying where it's targeted, and we're doing that as safely as possible. So first off, with spray nozzles, when we're applying XtendiMax 2 or Roundup Xtend 2, it's important that we use extremely coarse to ultra coarse spray nozzles, preferably ultra coarse, and that we're using a spray volume that supports that nozzle, making sure that we're avoiding any of those fine droplets that could have some off-target movement. In terms of temperature, dicamba products do have a temperature requirement to be applied ideally between 10 and 25 degrees Celsius, and avoiding anything over 30 degrees Celsius. The reason for that is we want to minimize potential evaporation of those droplets and make sure that that's on the plant, gets to the target it needs to be, and is absorbed by the plant. Now, another really important note that, as we know, applies to anything that we're spraying is avoiding spraying during temperature inversions. So this will typically present as dead calm conditions. That's why we say recommended wind speeds are at least 5 kilometers per hour up to 15 kilometers per hour. As during these dead periods where you're not having that air circulating in the atmosphere, you can form a level of cold air at the ground that traps that herbicide spray and allows it to move laterally out of the field and into other off-target locations. So we want to make sure that we have at least a little bit of wind out there while we're spraying, and avoid spraying in that evening to early morning when those temperature inversions are most likely to occur. And then another good point to mention here, always want to make sure that we're doing a triple rinse clean out after spraying any dicamba products. Very small amounts of dicamba can be harmful if they remain in tank or in lines for future applications. So always do a triple rinse clean out with an ammonia-based tank cleaner or any other commercial detergent cleaner. Just to continue on key recommendations for success when using Roundup Ready to Xtend crop system. So as Tyler's mentioned, and I've mentioned before, when we're going in for that first application, getting that pre-down with residual control, we want to be using Roundup Xtend 2, or if we're using XtendiMax, we want to tank mix with a burn-off product like Roundup WeatherMax as part of that first application. So we're getting our immediate burn down as well as that residual control in field. And then always important in terms of stewardship that whenever we're going after resistant weeds, that we're including an additional effective mode of action, particular glyphosate-resistant weeds, for effective weed control and proper herbicide stewardship, and make sure that the products we're using last for as long as possible and prevent any more resistance from developing in some of those challenging weeds. So something else that we wanted to cover off today, might have seen this change last year. We introduced second generation of our Roundup Xtend and XtendiMax. So now what you'll find is Roundup Xtend 2 and XtendiMax 2 herbicides. So all we did here, products themselves, the actives, they aren't changed. This is just a higher concentrated formulation, really for easier use. So you can cover off more acres with each jug or with each tote. In terms of what those rates look like, if we're looking at Roundup Xtend 2 at the high rate, we've dropped down. Originally, first generation, we had a 2 liter per acre rate. Now that's a 1.5 liter per acre rate. So in a 10-liter jug, you're getting an extra 2 acres per jug. Per tote, that's an extra 75 acres per tote. And then with XtendiMax, that high rate drops from 0.7 with first generation product to a 0.5 liter per acre rate with XtendiMax 2. Again, seeing a nice acreage increase per jug of 6 acres for that jug, and then for the tote, a 260-acre increase in what you can cover off with that tote. And it's important to mention here too, you're still getting that full rate of glyphosate with these new formulations. It's a true premix. Everything you need is in the mix, ready to go.
So in terms of weed control, we wanted to break down what some of the differences, growers, and what we can see between dicamba versus 2,4-D. We pulled this chart right out of Pub 75, Ontario's Guide to Weed Control, just kind of breaking down some of the main annual broadleaves and perennials that growers are faced with here in Ontario. I should mention to start, dicamba and 2,4-D have been around for several years. They're both group 4s, but they do have quite a few differences in terms of effective weed control. So when we start breaking things down a little bit closer, you'll pull away some differences on things like ragweeds, some of your perennials, velvet leaf, which is becoming more and more of a challenge to some growers. I should mention this is just initial kill. This doesn't take into account any residual activity, but there is significant differences, especially on Canada fleabane as well. When we zone in on Canada fleabane, and we have a little closer look. This is 28 days after application. This is some of the work from our Canada market development trials. We're comparing 2,4-D to dicamba or XtendiMax. You can see that control on Canada fleabane with that dicamba being much more superior. When we look at some of the premixes available in the market, our Roundup Xtend 2 at that high rate versus Enlist Duo, quite a bit of separation when it comes to initial kill and residual activity on Canada fleabane, which has been one of the most challenging weeds to Ontario farmers. So yeah, next slide, please.
And then just to illustrate that, we wanted to share some of the demos and trials that we've been running this past year. So this was a full systems approach comparing the Xtend system and the Enlist Duo system. So we went in with a pre-application that included a check, Roundup WeatherMax, Roundup Xtend 2, Enlist Duo, as well as Xtend plus Sencor, and then followed up in season with a simulated post-treatment of either Liberty or Roundup WeatherMax. So this is coming out of Plattsville on a really nice fleabane location that we had here. And this is now 35 days after application, so demonstrating really strong residual control here. You can tell this is obviously glyphosate-resistant fleabane. Our WeatherMax check is infested, but if we're looking at Roundup Xtend in the middle, that is some pretty clean ground. And this is obviously with no crop competition either. So this is really suppressing that fleabane, doing a good job holding it back with that residual control. But if we're looking over at Enlist Duo, you can really see that lack of residual control or very limited residual control and how that's broken. And we have, even though effective burn down, as 2,4-D can do an okay job burning off fleabane, those fleabanes are really coming up, and in a couple weeks, that's going to look pretty similar to the Roundup WeatherMax treatment off on the left-hand side. Now, if we extend this out into our post treatments, so this is now about 45 days after the initial application, just after we came in, or week after we came in with our Liberty and Roundup treatments. What we're really demonstrating here, as you can see in that top strip, is how effective Liberty can be at burning off glyphosate-resistant fleabane. And in combination with our Roundup Xtend treatments and Xtend plus Sencor, we're seeing really great control. Now, part of the key here is, while Liberty can do a really good job taking down fleabane, they need to be small. So ideally under 10 centimeters in height. And we're seeing that with Roundup Xtend 2, as well as the addition of Sencor, where because that residual control has really delayed any emergence of those soybeans, it's allowed us to come in with that second pass while they're still small and easy to control. The challenge with the Enlist Duo system off on the right, well, it looks like now it's been burnt off fairly well because those fleabane plants were already at a decent size when they might have been sprayed off by Liberty. There's a real chance for regrowth there. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind when using a product like Liberty, that Weed size needs to be fairly small to ensure an effective kill. Wanted to show this example as well. This was from a few years ago in Thamesville. Just another fleabane example here, looking at 2,4-D versus XtendiMax on its own. And this just really illustrates some really strong residual control. Pretty stark difference between those plots in terms of a carpet of fleabane off on the left-hand side with 2,4-D, whereas a nice clean field, even without crop competition with XtendiMax and dicamba.
So in terms of water hemp management, things continue to get more complex and more challenging. We've talked a little bit about water hemp in this presentation, but it's starting to create a lot of buzz as farmers. Some growers are already dealing with it, and some are dealing with it for the first time. These photos here are out of our research site in Port Alma back in July of 2020. You can see we're dealing with a pretty severe infestation of water hemp with our photo there in the untreated check on the left side. We wanted to illustrate what XtendFlex soybeans can do for water hemp management. In the picture in the middle, just basically highlights what the Roundup Xtend system, a very basic approach, can do to something like water hemp, which can be a really difficult weed to deal with. With our first generation Roundup Xtend product at the high rate applied pre, followed by a late post application of WeatherMax, you can see it did a pretty good job, but there's been a few late escapes. With any weed management approach, especially with water hemp, we do recommend overlapping effective modes of residual. In this case, on the far right, where we took that first gen Roundup Xtend at the high rate, and we added a residual product such as Fierce to the program, and then with the XtendFlex technology that allowed us to come back in with a late post application. In this case, it was Liberty. To clean up any late escapes, which did a very good job. Growers are using other Group 15s in the market, like Zidua as well, paired up with that Roundup Xtend. Again, multiple modes of effective management for resistant management, and you can see that this is a very effective system when we can put it to use.
Now, just to expand out and look at overall broadleaf weed control, this was the same set of trials that Tyler presented some information on earlier with fleabane, where we're looking at 2,4-D versus XtendiMax, so just our straight 2,4-D versus dicamba, as well as the Enlist Duo versus Roundup Xtend, where we're adding glyphosate to those mixes. So on the 2,4-D versus XtendiMax, we see a slight edge with XtendiMax of a 3% increase in weed control. But really, when we're adding in Roundup to the mix, or glyphosate to the mix, that's where the two systems really see a bit more separation. And we're looking at an 8% increase in weed control with Roundup Xtend versus Enlist Duo. This is predominantly looking at lamb's quarters, red root pigweed, as well as Canada fleabane across Ontario.
This was a situation, I wanted to highlight a few things that came of this situation, but this was back in July of 2022 around Croton, Ontario. Two colleagues of mine were called to a field where the grower had mistakenly applied Enlist Duo on XtendFlex soybeans. And what I want to make aware to growers is that 2,4-D will kill Xtend or XtendFlex soybeans, and vice versa. So we need to be very conscious of what's getting applied on the field and which system or which trait we're planting in those fields. So these pictures were taken 2 weeks after application of the Enlist Duo. While my colleagues were out there, they noticed a few other things. You can see in that middle picture, some pretty large Canada fleabane had been affected from the 2,4-D, but they were actually regrowing and basically suckered out to a point where it would be very tough to now control with Liberty with multiple growing points. Another thing we took from this field was the lacking residual. The 2 weeks after the Enlist was applied, you can see that initial flush of lamb's quarters was actually controlled quite well. 2 weeks later, a second flush of lamb's quarters appeared in the field, and We talked earlier about the critical weed-free period. This is a very crucial point for competition in that soybean field. If these beans were to survive, they would likely not be at that third trifoliate. So that flush of lamb's quarters is going to have a detrimental impact on yield at this point.
And then just to show the same set of trials that we had before, this time with a weed focus on pigweed and lamb's quarters. This is at our Tavistock research farm, where, as you can tell, we've got a real carpet in our weedy block where we like to throw these trials. And so looking again on the left-hand side, you can see Roundup Weather Max with no residual. We've got a real flush carpet of weeds coming through 14 days after application. And the only reason that this isn't worse is this was a particularly dry period following application. We just had a rain a few days later and ran into about 10 days of some pretty dry, warm weather. But despite that, with Roundup Xtend 2, you're seeing clean, no germinating fleabane, no germinating pigweed or lamb's quarters there. Or in List Duo, you can see how that's just started to break in the last week or so. We've got a good carpet developing of those weeds. And if we move out to another week, you can really see the difference where that Roundup treatment is full in List Duo. That's going to be a carpet pretty soon. And Roundup Xtend is holding on really well. Now, the only weeds that you're seeing emerging through there are a couple annual grasses. And as we know, dicamba, group 4, same with 2,4-D, they don't provide residual grass control, but that's where the addition of another residual herbicide like Sencor, that's going to provide some additional control on grasses could be a good opportunity.
So a little bit further out now, just wanted to compare again what the power is on the residual program that we're seeing with that Roundup Xtend at the high rate pre-plant on the left side versus that in List Duo at the high rate pre-plant as well. So we're 46 days after application. This is at our Chatham research farm back in July of 2020. This was the only 2 applications on this side by side. So basically just highlighting what the residual activity looks like and the power of dicamba again. I would argue that we probably wouldn't even need a cleanup pass on that left side. Where that 2,4-D on the right side, you can see that later flush of lamb's quarters and pigweeds topping up through the canopy. We talk about risk mitigation and things like that. At this point in the soybean's life, it's likely flowering. It's going through a very important part of its life cycle. We're going to try to avoid spraying herbicides at this point and stressing that crop out even further with temperature and whatever means. So just be conscious of what we're putting down and I guess plan accordingly for a residual program.
So just to give pause for a minute and give a quick overview of how Enlist E3 compares to the Xtend systems. So as you remember back to the beginning of the presentation, when we covered Roundup Ready to Xtend, that gives us the ability to spray glyphosate or Roundup, as well as dicamba or XtendiMax, and of course, any of your conventional soybean herbicides. Whereas XtendFlex also adds in glufosinate or Liberty tolerance as well. Compared to Enlist E3, as you'll have known by now, we swap out that group 4. So instead of dicamba that you're seeing in the XtendFlex system that gives you residual weed control, instead you're using 2,4-D choline, which on its own Enlist 1, which really lacks a bit of that residual weed control. So just important to always remember what can be sprayed in each system, particularly as you're seeing a bit more XtendFlex, and Enlist E3 in fields potentially close to each other. It's important to remember what is safe to spray in each field out there. So to dive in a little bit more specifically into dicamba, as we know, is the foundational herbicide in the Roundup Ready to Xtend crop system. And as Tyler and I have touched on, it's going to give you excellent control of some tough to manage weeds and herbicide-resistant weeds, such as Canada fleabane, water hemp, giant ragweed, common ragweed. And the addition of glyphosate in there with Roundup Ready to with Roundup Xtend 2, that's also going to bring in some velvet leaf, mustard, grassy weeds, perennial weed control. Now, if we're looking at a side-by-side of them after weed control ratings, comparing dicamba to 2,4-D I've highlighted in bold here what product does better on which weeds. So you can see in terms of dicamba, superior Canada fleabane, as has been demonstrated in some of those images we've shown, better on common ragweed, and better on your nightshades, which are important to consider for soybeans as well. 2,4-D, slight edge on giant ragweed. And then if we look down at water hemp, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So 2,4-D and dicamba on their own are equivalent on water hemp. But if you're comparing Roundup Xtend 2 and Enlist Duo, so that's adding glyphosate to the mix, we see a pretty significant separation where Roundup Xtend 2 still keeps that 8 weed control rating on water hemp, which is considered to be quite strong, quite effective, where Enlist Duo drops all the way down to a 5. That's a 5 out of 9, really substandard control, something you're not going to be happy with in field. So just a bit of separation there too that I thought it would be important to point out. Overall, dicamba and the full system in XtendFlex and Roundup Xtend, it's a solid weed resistance program when used as part of a diversified weed management program.
So moving on from weed control, in terms of performance, yield is still king to most growers. So we wanted to give a little bit of a snapshot of what we're seeing in our field scale trials. This is across over 650 comparisons in 2023, comparing all brands of Roundup Ready to Xtend and XtendFlex versus all brands Enlist E3. So we're seeing a 4.9 bushel advantage with those Roundup Xtend and XtendFlex genetics over that Enlist system. So we consider anything over 60% win rate to be pretty significant. In this case, we're 75%, and we see these genetics continuing to get stronger as we move forward, as we develop newer traits and a more robust lineup. So keep this in mind when trying to choose the right system. Well, yield matters first, and then we need to look at the specifics in terms of weed control. Just to summarize on some of the things we talked about today on why choose Roundup to Xtend or XtendFlex system. Firstly, that 4.9 bushel per acre yield advantage is very significant in terms of genetic differences. That short-term residual weed control during that critical weed-free period is absolutely crucial for growers to get the most out of their soybean crop. The flexibility now for an in-crop, a much safer post-emerge option with the XtendFlex system using our glufosinate or group 10. As well as the effective burn down and residual control of many annuals, perennials, and grassy weeds we're finding with the Roundup 2 Xtend herbicide. And when things like water hemp become more and more popular in the countryside, we're going to rely on the Roundup Xtend 2 herbicide to help combat some of these resistant weeds. We've seen that over the last several years with Canada fleabane and common ragweed control with using the dicamba products and having excellent effective control to combat some of these tougher to control weeds.
So that wraps up most of what we wanted to talk about with the XtendFlex and Roundup Xtend system. But what we're excited to kind of leave you with is a bit of a sneak peek on what's coming next. So I'm sure you've probably heard some rumors around HT4. It's been some chatter over the last few years, but we're finally able to really talk about this and present it as it's coming down the pipeline, expecting to launch in 2027. So what will be HT4 soybeans? So it's a bit of a misnomer. I think marketing's working on a new name for it. It's our 4th generation, but we've got 5 different herbicide tolerances. So this is expected to be the industry first with 5-way herbicide tolerance in soybeans. And so in addition to the XtendFlex system that we're building on, where we have glyphosate, glufosinate, and dicamba, we're adding in another group 4 and 2,4-D, which, as we know, even though that doesn't offer a great setup group 4, that is an option for an in-field control that gives it a little bit more flexibility, as well as mesotrione or Callisto group 27. So the whole idea behind adding these additional 2 herbicides and modes of action is to give growers additional flexibility in their applications to manage resistant and tough to control weeds specific to their farm. And also as a part of this, our plan is to optimize weed management offerings with proprietary herbicide formulations launching alongside this HT4 system. Now, along with developing these proprietary formulations, as well as the traits, our precision breeding team's been working really hard on bringing forward a full slate of soybeans. We're expecting in 2027 when we launch, we've got a full maturity range to meet our agronomic needs right across Ontario. So look at the specifics of what 2,4-D and mesotrione are going to bring to the table here. So as we mentioned before, 2,4-D, that has your foliar activity as a group 4, and good activity on a few different key weeds, including kochia, water hemp, Canada fleabane. Mesotrione is really something to be excited about, though, where we're adding another residual activity as well as foliar activity herbicide that does have action on Canada fleabane, water hemp, and kochia as well for those out west. And the key here too is this is a novel mode in a group 27. So in terms of how these can be sprayed in field and what you can expect for this program, all 2,4-D, mesotrione, glufosinate, and dicamba will be able to be sprayed right from pre-emergence up to R1. Same as usual, glyphosate can be sprayed up to R2. This figure's a little bit of a misnomer, as this is directed more for the states where they have some more limitations around dicamba applications. We're expecting that we'll be able to spray dicamba still up to R1. Just keep in mind, I think we laid a pretty good case for why dicamba is a real good setup herbicide up front, taking advantage of that short-term residual weed control. So yeah, thank you for your attention this morning. I hope you benefited from this presentation. We'd love to hear any questions that you've got, and our contact information is on the slide there if anything comes to mind later on. And I believe we've got CEU credits as well if you scan that QR code. But yeah, thank you for your attention, and we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tyler and Kurtis. That, like they said, that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. So we're going to open up for some Q&A here. We've got a few that came through, so we'll get into those. And like Kurtis mentioned, this has been approved for 1 CEU credit in crop management. So please scan the QR code on the screen to redeem your credits. If this doesn't work, please email your first name, last name, and CCA number to topcrop@annexbusinessmedia.com, and we'll submit that for you. So questions. Post-emerge, is there an option to tank mix Roundup Liberty to get grasses and broadleaves? Roundup/Liberty.
Yeah, I can tackle that one. So I might have missed mentioning this before in the presentation, but with Liberty, you're not able to tank mix with Roundup, WeatherMax, or Transorb. And it's also important not to tank mix with XtendiMax 2 or Roundup Xtend 2. Part of the reason with those dicamba products is Liberty is a glufosinate ammonium product, and ammonium can increase the potential for volatilization with those dicamba products. So that's a no for any Roundup or dicamba containing products, no tank mix with Liberty.
Gotcha. How can I best burn down a mixed alfalfa grass hayfield that I plan to plant into soybeans after first cut? Harvest likely end of May, early June. No glyphosate resistant weeds in the field. Would Roundup Transorb alone be enough? I can reread that one if you need me to.
Sure.
How can I best burn down mixed alfalfa grass hayfield that I plan to plant into soybeans after first cut? Harvest likely end of May, early June. No glyphosate resistant weeds in this field. Would Roundup Transorb alone be enough?
I think the addition that Roundup Xtend 2 product in this case, I think, is still going to be pretty important to get that alfalfa. I don't know whether the Transorb or WeatherMax Roundup products would be enough at that point. I don't know, Kurtis, would you?
Yeah, I can touch on that briefly. So with Roundup, there is a high label rate for alfalfa that you can go to. I believe it's around 4 liters per hectare, but double check that on the label. But definitely the addition of dicamba in there is going to give you a lot better control of broadleaf like alfalfa. So I think Tyler's right there. That's probably your best action.
Perfect. This is a little bit of a broad one, but I think it was kind of halfway through there. What about water hemp control and extend beans, i.e. without flex? You kind of touched about water hemp control.
Yeah, I think so. We go back to dicamba being the foundation in that Roundup Xtend program. If we're not using an XtendFlex system, I think water hemp is still manageable. It becomes more important to layer down those multiple effective modes and multiple effective residuals as well on top of that dicamba. So Roundup Xtend 2, along with something like a Fierce or a Zidua type of product with your Roundup Xtend is going to be absolutely important. I think that very first pass in your burn down is going to be the most important pass in a water hemp situation.
Yeah, I'll emphasize what Tyler said there, where a group 15 is really a good option to give you a little bit more control on water hemp. And then we just want to be making sure as well that we're not just relying on one chemistry or mode of action with a challenging weed like water hemp that we know develops resistance quite easily. And whenever you're using multiple modes of action, ensure that we're using rates that both deliver the same effectiveness in control. So we're just making sure that any potential resistance that's developing is bitten in the butt quick by that alternate mode of action you're applying in field.
Gotcha. And just the fellow that asked about tank mixing Roundup and Liberty, he had to duck out there, so he missed your answer. So I don't know if you want to touch on that again. I feel like it might not be a bad point to bring home again.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, as I mentioned before, Roundup and Liberty, that's a no-go for a tank mix. And while we're on that topic too, we're also not able to tank mix Liberty with Roundup Xtend 2 or XtendiMax 2. As I previously said, Liberty is a glufosinate ammonium, and ammonium can increase the volatilization potential with dicamba products. So just keep in mind, no tank mix there with Liberty.
Oh, I guess there's one thing. Can you take the mouse off the QR code if you have it there? I think it's messing with the people being able to scan it.
Oh, it should be off it now, I think.
Be off it there now. What about volunteer Roundup Ready canola control? We might need some more context on that one. Whoever typed that one in.
I just wanted to add on the water hemp question. I think it's a system approach, and I think it's a multi-year approach. If you're in a situation where you're just using Roundup Extends, I think it's very important to make sure in a rotational situation we're using something that's effective, like a Group 27 in your corn crop, or a product like Infinity in your wheat crop, Infinity FX, to provide another mode of action on some of these weeds. Even after weed harvest, it's important not to let a product or a weed like water hemp go to seed, making it a bigger challenge for next year's soybean crop. So I don't think it's necessarily this moment or this year's approach. I think we have to treat this weed year after year.
So he added on here Roundup Ready canola and Xtend soybeans. Another water hemp one here. So water hemp is a concern on my farm. What do you recommend to help manage it?
Yeah, I think for the water hemp again, as we previously mentioned, you want to make sure you're going after with multiple effective modes of action to discourage any resistance from forming. It's always good to know too what resistant population you have, as it can vary quite a bit across Ontario. But whenever you're going in, a group 15 is a great mode of action. Group 4s, so that's our like dicamba, is a good opportunity to take them down too. Just always make sure we're using multiple modes of action. And one of the challenges with water hemp is it emerges right throughout the year, and some of those late emergers right up into early fall can still go to seed that year. And we want to make sure because of that you've got a strong residual herbicide that's going to prevent those late emergers, and that you're using cleanup passes if you need to prevent those from going to seed.
Perfect. A couple more here, and then if anybody else has any, feel free to type them into that Q&A tab. Can adjuvants or surfactants be used with XtendiMax 2 or Roundup Xtend 2?
Right. So with both of those products, you can use a non-ionic surfactant, an NIS, but you can't use an MSO or a COC. So just important to keep that in mind. All that's in the label. So if you're ever unsure, just double check, but you are able to use a non-ionic surfactant.
And then last one here. When should I consider an option like XtendFlex in order to be able to use glufosinate in a crop, phosphonate in crop?
So XtendFlex, yeah, so it gives us the option for that glufosinate. I think when we know what weeds we're dealing with in the operation, whether it's Canada fleabane or giant ragweed, water hemp, again, the foundational part of the system is to start clean and stay clean, utilize your residual programs. And I think to be able to utilize glufosinate as a rescue, maybe not as a planned approach, but use it as a rescue, it's a good tool to have as in that situation. Whether if we get a few escapes, it's a contact herbicide. So we gotta make sure coverage is key. We don't want to go after a huge carpet of weeds. We want to go after a few escapes. So it's important that tool is there if we need it, but I'm not sure we want to utilize it as a planned approach.
Gotcha. I had another one come through. Will XtendiMax control lily of the valley?
That I'd need to double check. I'm pretty sure that's not on label. That might be a spray and find out, because I know lily of the valley is one of those sort of oddball weeds. I'd be thinking you probably do have some activity on it, but I'm 90% sure that's not a labeled weed for XtendiMax.
Gotcha. Okay, well that's it for the questions that came through here. So again, Tyler and Curtis's contact information is on the screen there. And again, if you had trouble with the QR code, feel free to send your first name, last name, and CCA number to topcrop@annexbusinessmedia.com, and we'll submit that credit for you. I wanted to thank you all for joining today to learn more about soybean success strategies brought to you by Bayer and DEKALB seeds. We hope this session helped you get more prepared for the upcoming planting season. And just a reminder, please join us again tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time using the same link for part 2 of this webinar series, as we'll focus on corn success strategies. Thanks again, both of you, and looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow.